Good afternoon, everyone. We are here on May 22nd at noon for Clark County Multifamily Housing Forum, Code Forum. Thank you all for joining. It's the first time we've convened this group in a while. I am hoping to address technical difficulties here soon, but I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth Decker, who is going to lead this conversation today, starting with a presentation. So, and in the meantime, I'll try to fix the video situation. So take it away, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. You can just like be the talking head for all of us, right? I'd like you to pantomime all of the reactions and emotions for the whole group. You can be like the Greek chorus. But welcome to our true Greek chorus. Thank you all for being here as we're restarting our forum series. Both because we had a first series of forums about the middle housing and the low density zones. And we did, as some of you may recall, start on the multifamily concepts last spring before pausing it to really focus all our energy on the adoption of that first batch. So we're restarting it in both of those senses. So we thought we'd just take a minute to welcome you all. And I think a lot of folks are pretty familiar. I don't know if we need to do introductions, but Jose, would you like to say a few official welcoming words for us?
Sure. Thanks, Elizabeth. Yes. So this is restarting the multifamily housing. I think you'll see in the presentation and part of the discussion some of the slight changes due to the comp plan update and what we're required to do based on commerce guidance that wasn't in existence when the HOSAP recommendations first came out. So looking forward to a lively discussion and your input.
I think I may have fixed the issue, Elizabeth. Do you want to try to turn on your video?
Sure. Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So for those who choose to do so, you can now turn on your video. Thank you.
Good work, Steve. Nothing like solving it on the fly. All right. And then I will also pull up our presentation to help us kind of work through the conversation. As you all saw in the materials we sent out last week, there is, a lot of concepts as we're picking up things from that we started last year. So I tried to reflect, what we discussed last year, if there was some clear direction, but also acknowledging it has been a year. As Jose said, the comp plan has provided us maybe not a different policy direction so much as a change in the order of magnitude of what needs to be done. So we're picking it all up. We're working on addressing these three main areas of code: middle housing in the medium density zones, multifamily and affordable housing uses across all the medium and high density zones. So we'll spend the bulk of the meeting talking about that and then briefly touch on some next steps in terms of our next forum meetings. But project overview, as you all know, here we are, right? We're back again, take 2 of phase 2 on the HOSAP implementation, focusing on these 3 components. Meanwhile, I know many of you have been closely involved with the 2025 comp plan update and the requirements to accommodate housing needs for all income bands. And so as we are coming back to this, we are trying to merge it into, sort of a combination goal, one goal to rule them all, that to make progress on both, right? We don't want to only focus on the HOSAP and ignore that this comp plan is coming. And in some cases that gives us some opportunity to exceed the initial HOSAP strategies. But our number one goal is to avoid creating any conflicts with these code updates that might then have to be changed or redone as a result of the 2025 plan implementation. So even if we can't get everything done to get towards the 2025 plan, we at least don't want to create any obstacles to get there. So I think that the number that just stands out to me, and again, I know a lot of you are involved in this, but that the county within the unincorporated Vancouver UGA needs to triple the current capacity for multifamily. to accommodate the 20-year housing projections. And so, you know, that's just a staggering number when we look at some of the HOSAP strategies. You know, they really, it's hard to quantify some of them, but I'll go out on a limb and say, I don't think that they're going to get us all the way there, because they really weren't designed to, right? You think back to the HOSAP process we worked on through 2020, 2021, culminating in adoption about 2 years ago. We just didn't know. So this is a rapidly evolving policy environment. Again, we want to do our best with this HOSAP implementation, make additional progress where we can, but just understand that the goalposts have really changed. So there's a lot to be done. Just breaking down those numbers a little bit more, if this is a helpful way to look at data for you. The zoning districts in the Vancouver unincorporated growth area, unincorporated Vancouver urban growth area, across these different zones designations, the capacity based on number of units, you know, just overwhelmingly housing capacity is in the low density residential, with this very small blue sliver for high density. So that, you know, is only about 1,500 units, and that actually is only based on 70 acres of buildable acres, or 70 buildable acres in those high density zones. And so some of the strategies, when we start talking about it, I think it's helpful to keep that context in mind, that we're talking about a very small amount of land that needs to accomplish a lot, and we'll probably need to expand, but right now we're working with a pretty small land base. So we have to triage and prioritize in some ways that perhaps we haven't considered the urgency before. All right, any initial questions before we start talking through the code concepts about what you're all doing here? I can't see anyone's faces, but all right. Let's get started then, because we have a lot of concepts to go through. First piece is picking up the middle housing work that we did in the R1 zones, the low density zones, and translating that to the medium and high density zones. So the two components there is adjusting which housing types, and then the scale and density. So a lot of, this is the same table that was in the memo. A lot of the changes that we're looking at here are consistent with what was done in the R1 zones. So generally anything that was a review and approval use, the idea that that can go straight to being a permitted use, that the RA process just isn't applicable. If there's site design review, then there is, but it's a permitted use. The other pieces you'll see in the medium density zones is carrying through the triplex and quadplexes, now that they're a separate defined housing types, continuing to permit cottage housing, but did not see the need to expand compact lot development into these medium density zones. And that's due to the increased density and scale just permitted outright for single family detached. So, you know, the compact lot development doesn't really, the key to that is adding more density. And if we've already got that, it's less applicable in this context.
So
I think
one quick question on that though.
Mhm.
When you look at R12 and maybe even R18, I almost think that some of the compact lots, you're able to do more density in, say, the R15 than you are in R12 or R18. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So we want to look at that. And if we're changing the lot sizes in R12, R18 and across the board, then it probably corrects itself.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Eric. Let's keep going to the next concept about the scales that we're looking at, because I think that that's a little bit more open-ended than we originally thought when we did this first, when we were looking at this last year. So, but I think that is a good one to flag. So we'll see where the numbers wind up and make sure we're aware of that. The other area to really draw your attention to that's changed since we talked about this last year is given that, immense triple capacity for multifamily that we're looking at in this area, thinking about how to shift the focus for these high density zones, which again are 70 buildable acres total, and trying to get be very focused about their use and intent, potentially shifting almost all of these middle housing uses to not permitted uses, so that multifamily is like the single prioritized use type for those high density zones. So that is, yes, we're gonna get, that's the very next slide, Eric.
Okay.
And so that's the question. Does this, what's your thought about how to treat these high density zones as we're working in the 2025 plan context?
Well, I think the intent is to go higher density, but we come across a lot of these small parcels that are under an acre. And you're trying to do some kind of a high density and it doesn't fit. So if you have a small R30, R43, and it's under an acre, even under 2 acres, it really doesn't work. Sometimes the only economical use is putting like a duplex or a triplex, because on a small site like that, if you have to go through a type 2 site plan or a type 3, it's not cost effective right out the door. So you have to do something that's a type 1. So you're probably putting a duplex in, triplex, or some other use because the site's too small for the economy of scale to make it work.
Okay, yeah,
Go ahead, Phil.
so
Oh,
smaller
sorry.
sites, noted.
Go ahead, Phil.
I apologize. I was kind of working on something in the background here as well. But Elizabeth, are you talking about limiting product types in higher density residential zones? So my general response to that is I strongly believe that's the incorrect approach. It's an incorrect approach to policy. If what we're after, if what the county's policy objectives are density of housing and bedrooms, the product type should be left to the market. It should not be predefined in the planning code about what you can and can't build, that it's density that should govern and density alone. It's up to individual builders and developers to figure out what works. That's my opinion.
Got it. Other thoughts here as we're specifically looking at that R30 and R43 zone?
Jack?
Yeah, just kind of the thing, like, I guess along the lines of Eric, if the site is large enough, I think the market is going to do as much density as possible because it makes the most economic sense. But when it's too small, it doesn't, and then it just sits vacant. So I think that's, and to Phil's point, I think the market will determine that, not putting restrictions on it, because I can't imagine a 20-acre parcel, if we had that available for apartment complexes, all of a sudden a developer deciding not to put in the density that they could get in there, that wouldn't make sense to me either. So that's kind of my thinking of it's always scary to like just let the marketplace decide, but it will. I mean, as far as, because it comes down to how many doors can we get in on a lot and make it pencil on the spreadsheet. So.
Go ahead, Brian.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I guess I generally agree with folks, and I have the least expertise here on where the sort of thresholds are on what the market will and won't produce. And obviously it's a particularly fraught time now with the interest rate climate the way it is. I think it's hard to, if we're trying to squeeze as much as we can out of those 70 acres, it's hard to do that without knowing how some ballpark idea of what we would add to the 70. And so I as part of this process, I see we're kind of thinking a little more on criteria for future rezones, which to me seems somewhat of a narrow reading of the language that came out of the HOSAP H016 stuff. Because I think we're obviously not going to come up with, any kind of detailed map from this group. It's too big a project. But I think some discussion about opportunities for adding, where that might be, how that might be, can give a little bigger context to all of us on what we need to do with the 70. If we know there's the 70 is only going to get another 30 acres added to it, that's one thing. If we know there's going to be something more substantial, I think that should change how we think about it.
Yeah, and Brian, thanks for tying together some of the strategies. I would just clarify, you're right. The HOSAP strategy includes both considering some criteria for upzoning as well as actually doing some of that. Only the portion about criteria was initially identified, a few years ago as part of the the initial code implementation phase. But, I think that talking with Jose and other folks at the county, we agreed that the scenario that we're in now with the 2025 plan, you'll see that we definitely want to get some feedback on, what that upzoning might look like at this time. And that's just guidance for the comp plan rather than a specific, map change that we would do with these code updates.
Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna kind of just work on it from the standpoint of what Eric said initially. It feels like if we have a goal in mind, that goal in mind is going to be the density. And in regard to that, it feels like that is the defining criteria that the county should be putting forward, and then allowing the individual developers to develop to the density with whatever product that they think is most appropriate. If we find that we're not getting particular parcels to develop at that density, then there's opportunities to have discussion about what density, what kind of product. But to me, initially, it feels like going in, the county needs density. They should drive the density number and then just let the marketplace go ahead and try and fulfill that density as described by the county requirement.
Thanks. All right, Steve, do we have anybody else queued up?
Nope, I think we can keep moving.
Okay, well, I think you all are identifying some important aspects of density that are going to inform the housing type. So let's keep going with this, and maybe that continues the broader discussion. So when you start thinking about whatever the range of housing types, winds up being in these R zones, trying to get the density and scale right is the next really important piece. If we're going to talk about letting density guide, then we need to talk about it. So we've got some different parameters that we're trying to fit within. So middle housing density, right, has gone up to 22 units per acre, about 21.8 is the max that can be done with some of those middle housing types. And so, considering that, we certainly are trying to design the medium density and high density to provide more intense development opportunities relative to that. And on the other end, the high density right now, the comp plan says the maximum is 43 acres or 43 units per acre. So between that, the part of the comp plan updates with the previous implementation said, there is no max in the medium density, but I think for our purposes, we're somewhere in between 22 and 43, trying to scale upwise. And one sort of goal somewhere in that that we talked about with county staff was looking at, could there be some minimum lot sizes or maximum densities, whichever tools we choose, with the goal of allowing a quadplex on a 5,000 square foot lot. And so that turns out to be about 34.8 units per acre. So maybe that's one of the targets. So the max is certainly part of it. And then also just to keep in mind, we're also looking at increasing minimum densities as part of these strategies. And in order to encourage more efficiency, get that capacity that the 2025 plan is needing, increasing the minimums to 80% of wherever the maximums are set. And so another large confusing table, but hopefully familiar from the packet. We talked last year when we first were going through these topics about what the combination is between lot sizes and densities. Is it all just a single density for all housing types? Are there specific minimum lot sizes that would make more sense for some middle housing types? So I know that last year we leaned more towards a single density approach. I heard some interest to take another look when we're thinking particularly at the quadplexes. How do we get that 5,000 square foot quadplex lot? Maybe it's through minimum lot size rather than maximum density. So but depending on where maximum density goes, it may or may not be necessary. So a range of things to consider here, right? I think a couple of things I'd point out is the memo includes some reductions to the townhouse minimum lot sizes in all the medium density zones. And that's just to account for the fact that they're already at 2,000 in R15. So adding some differentiated opportunities here in these medium density zones, also to help offset the idea that townhouses would not continue in R30 and R43. So some of those smaller lot sizes could instead be done in the medium density. These are some ideas what minimum lot sizes, if that's what we used, would look like for the plexes. But I think the key really has to do with however the minimum or the maximum densities get set here, because they could, you know, stand in for these minimum lot sizes on the plexes instead. So I think, you know, I suggested a range based on, you know, again, those overlapping circles, nothing lower than 22, given that that's what's permitted in R15, you know, but nothing more than 43. So that, you know, 34.8 being a potential maximum. Question like how much gradation is necessary across these zones? Is it important? Is it not important? And then that also, you know, we need to, at this point, we need to stay at 43. Well, we've talked about staying at 43, but our 30, 43, should those numbers go higher while we're at it? And then we can come back to where exactly minimum density. These currently are set at about 80% of what the maximum is, but could use some further adjustment depending on where we go. So number of questions for you, and I can go back to that table if that's helpful. So, you know, same question that we continued talking about from last year. In the medium density zones, do you think it's more useful to look at the higher maximum densities across the board? So on the higher end of those ranges, or differentiating some minimum lot sizes for middle housing types? And then thinking like, are the maximums proposed for those medium density zones, are those enough for cottage housing outright, or just rather than the current bonus that exists in the R1 zones? Does any bonus still needed in the medium density zones? And then looking at those high density zones, is this an opportunity? Do you have any recommendations about where those densities might go in the 2025 plan context that could either be done with these code updates or the plan implementation? And then even, you know, maybe as an interim step or as part of that, looking these max densities in the R30 and R43, we heard that right now there wasn't a lot of development interest in multifamily housing types that were more dense than this, but perhaps some affordable housing types could take advantage of higher densities and somewhere in the like 50 to 100 units per acre. So maybe an affordable housing bonus in these zones as either a part of this strategy or could that be a useful component? So let me know which slide is easier for discussion, but looking for expecting a lot of intelligent feedback from you all right now.
All right, we'll start with Eric and then go to Phil.
We'll go back to that other table, the
Definitely.
one slide before. So the minimum densities here, I
Mhm.
just have a feeling we're gonna have some definite unintended consequences if we change that to higher, because there's a lot of these sites, again, if they're too small, we're gonna be having a tough time meeting those densities cost effectively. So I would say more flexibility. I'm okay with raising it, but
Mhm.
raising the maximum density, but the minimum density, I almost think we should leave it right where it is. There's it doesn't hurt us that much. Usually people are trying to get as much density as they can, but there's a lot of constraints that come up. And if we make it less flexible, we could discourage development instead of encouraging some type of housing. And the site might just sit vacant because they can't hit these densities. But we've already had these unintended consequences of little language tweaks, and trying to set these thresholds that end up making development ineffective or not cost effective. So I would say let's not make it any more restrictive, but look at widening it instead.
All right, thanks.
Go ahead, Phil.
I agree with Eric. I won't repeat what he said. I'll add a couple of items to that. One is, I mean, these densities, I think, just in support of what Eric is saying, they can't be interpreted in the abstract. You know, we need to look at densities in terms of you know, what type of product type can you build. So I agree with Eric that introducing additional constraints on the low end is probably not a good idea. Because we'd have to do some detailed analysis on different product types. I also agree that increasing maximums would be fantastic because that would give you more flexibility to add density where, you know, where it's supported, where the numbers of a particular project will support additional investment. So that's one point. My other point is just the minimum lot sizes as you get into higher density single family product can be problematic. And I like using densities over the minimum lot sizes. And I'll give you an example. Ginn Group is currently building a 92 unit attached townhome. Now, granted, they're apartments, they're not platted, but I think they could be platted. But we're building products that are primarily, they're 14 feet wide, garage under, 2 and 3 bedroom units. And we're about 2/3 of the way. This is off of Fourth Plain Boulevard, and the group honestly is welcome to come visit the project. Just reach out to me if you want to see it. They're well designed, but those products are 14 wide. I think they're about 58 to 60 deep, which means with a setback, you could probably do one on an 80-foot deep lot. That would be a little over a 1,200 square foot lot if you were building them attached, if you could plat them. They live really well. As I said, the market has responded well to them. We're hitting a fantastic density. That wouldn't be allowed. That product wouldn't be allowed. I couldn't plat that under R18 or even R22, you know, unless I had really big yards in the back, which may or may not be feasible given the shape of the size. So I'm just a little bit leery about minimum lot sizes that don't provide some flexibility for product types that don't exist in the market today, you know, except in a few circumstances. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
Brian.
Well, I think as I mentioned, you know, I don't pretend to have, you know, the kind of specific expertise we need to really answer this question. I would say, though, just a reminder to state the obvious, whatever gets built is going to be around for decades. And so I don't know where the thresholds are, where the balance points are to be struck, but there may be things that are in an effort to get things built quickly. And there are real public policy reasons to bring more housing on the market soon. Where that also may limit long-term options to build to higher densities or more desirable products in some ways. And so the only thing I can add right now is there some way to be more restrictive on larger parcels where presumably the flexibility, I mean, I totally get the point of as you go to smaller parcels, some of these minimum lot sizes and some of these may thwart development to the point that it's just not worth it. I would presume, and again, I think everybody here on the call knows more than I do about this, as you get to bigger properties, there's ways of working it. And so I don't know that a one size fits for all properties in a particular zone. I don't know that a one size fits all minimum lot size is the way to go.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I
Go
have
ahead,
seen
Jen.
codes that differentiate, like minimum density doesn't apply on parcels less than 1 acre or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I think my concern is when we increase the minimum density, you in effect, you really do start changing the product type from something like maybe that Jen might develop, you know, 14-foot wide, but can be platted as a single family, or sold off as condo units, to where you provide an opportunity for home ownership. To once you increase that density, you've really moved to a purely an apartment-based product, which is now owned by, you know, developers, corporations, you know, what have you. But it removes it adds to the rental pool versus the home ownership pool. And I think that's, something to be cognizant of it. It starts dictating that, like maybe now all of a sudden we're not building as nice of a product. We're building a cheaper product for, ROI. And it's like, because we're just having renters in there and they're there for a year or 18 months or 24, whatever the average rental span is. So, and again, I go back to maximum flexibility, especially when we get to all of the other regulations. I mean, even an acre is a small, which I understand what Brian was saying, but when we get to like just an acre, but then we meet all the clean water requirements and the open space requirements and everything else, again, we're really forcing the product type because there's just not enough actual buildable footprint. So that's my thoughts.
Looks like you're good to keep moving, Elizabeth.
All right. I guess I'll just fish, I'm hearing like, yes, more flexibility, more density. Any thoughts about, is it important to have a gradation of maximum density across these medium density zones, or does that become less important at this juncture? Do we even need 3 medium density zones? That's my question.
I don't know if Ron has an answer to that, but he does have his hand raised. So go ahead, Ron.
I would advocate perhaps the maximum density just comes off. I'm not quite sure that gradation is really important if we are trying to hit that crazy high number that you started this whole presentation with. The idea of, regardless of R12, R22, R18, if the particular parcel is able to take it and it looks like a product that the market will appreciate, it hits a higher density than the minimum, let it roll. I'm not sure that we're gaining anything by creating this artificial gradation as you're kind of talking about, Elizabeth.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for weighing in, Ron.
Phil, go ahead.
Just to back Ron's point up, I mean, I think we're at a point too where not having a gradation maybe isn't a bad place to start. County staff looks at code updates a couple of times per year. I think providing some flexibility to see how the market responds to this housing affordability crisis at this time in particular is important. What products work, what don't work. I think the more latitude we give developers to try to come up with solutions to that problem, the better. I think, we can dial it back later if we find it's not working.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's keep going. So as Brian, as you alluded to, there's another strategy here about zoning more high density residential land. And so as far as the strategy, the portion of the strategy that was recommended for code implementation that we started with was to address these 2 different scenarios where you've got low density residential land that maybe, someone's seeking to rezone to higher density, either medium or high, and situations where you've got commercial land and when and where that might be suitable to rezone to high density residential. So as already mentioned, this isn't a mapping exercise for all of us. Unfortunately, if you brought your box of crayons, you'll have to keep them in your bags. We don't get to do that quite yet, but there are some opportunities in code. The code aspect of this strategy is really to look at the purpose statement, if that could help direct some of these rezones, as well as some comp plan approval criteria for plan map changes. So we have some limited opportunities, but it really lets us, consider what are the factors for where higher density land should be suited. So it's all about, proximity to different services and amenities. And then I think the opportunity here is both like, should we move forward with these parts of the HOSAP strategy to change some of the pieces of the code? But even more important, given that we need to, look at tripling multifamily capacity and meet these different housing needs, we get an early opportunity here to brainstorm some guidance or input for the 2025 plan about where urban medium capacity could be added, or what kinds of scenarios should be considered. So really looking for some feedback here about what could be done. And Jose, did you want to add anything about that? Like what would be particularly useful or what's already been considered? Just to put you on the spot.
We're open to all suggestions.
Great.
Phil, start us off, please.
I doubt I'm going to get a strong reception on this, but one of the biggest bars on the private side, to trying to put a piece of property to its highest and best use is having to jump comp plan designations, right? Because and particularly in Clark County, because it's nearly a 2-year process. So if I find a property that's zoned R15, and I'm like, well, gosh, this would be great as an R12 or R18. But in order for me to jump that one zone, I've got to go through a 2-year process. And then after the 2-year process on comp plan, I've got to go through entitlement. It becomes entirely unmanageable. So one way that I think the county and other jurisdictions could increase the likelihood of higher density products would be to allow maybe to consolidate the comp plan districts so that you could do zone changes through a broader spectrum of the comp plan. Jose, I think you probably follow me. Essentially, there's the matrix where so I don't have to jump from low density to medium density. Then, if it was zoned R5, I could come in and make the case to county staff and to the hearings examiner and say, hey, this site warrants higher density. Here's why, and here's how it's going to fit. If I have the flexibility to do that, I may take on that project. In-group may take on that project. If I have to go through a comp plan change process, boy, that's a lot less likely.
Yeah, I can picture just the table you mean, Phil.
Other thoughts on this question? Ron.
All right, so the question, do you support revisions to the R district purpose statement and criteria for changing designation to urban medium high? I think if we go back just to the previous discussion, and let's just say, let's meld all that stuff and come up with a minimum density requirement. I even like the discussion earlier that we had that said, let the size of the parcel dictate what kind of product types can be put in. And that criteria there, I think, would help immensely with the whole thing. It may even help, to Phil's point, to a certain degree. I think we need to get as flexible as possible with the idea of continuing to go back to that one particular goal that we say is most important to have this comp plan be successful. Yeah, I'd like us to say if there's going to be criteria, we can't talk about just this urban growth area outside of the Vancouver border. We got to be able to open up the discussion, I think, about what criteria really make sense. Hazeldale should have no height limitations. Hazeldale should be a high density area with all the transport that's available there and the commercial services available. We should be looking at anything that's over adjacent to the 205 in the same kind of fashion. We have always wanted to just incrementally go one notch at a time and see what the outcome is, but I think our hand is going to get forced on this, and I would much rather us be wide open on it going in, because whatever comes before county council is going to get pared down quite a bit anyway. So as far as that thought process goes, I think we need to really just open up our thought processes about what we're able to support and make it all about the size of the parcel.
Thank you, Ron. Brian, go ahead. Brian Snodgrass, are you there? Or maybe you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Agree with what I'm hearing, especially Phil's point about let's make the future rezones easier by making more of them doable through a rezone rather than the lengthy comp plan process. I think criteria for even if it's just a rezone and not a comp plan process, it's still a discretionary review involving public hearings. One of the criteria, not the only one, obviously, one that should be considered is the extent to which the property or the proposal rather provides, it hastens affordability, not just more units, but includes some sort of either below market or affordable component. We actually had an annual review last year where the developer voluntarily came forward at the start of the process to have 5% of the units at 80% AMI or less. So it can work. But I think that can help. We don't need to be too specific about it, but I think as a general criteria for rezone approval, I think that can help the housing affordability cause. I think also, and this gets a little less towards future rezones and what rezoning essentially will be done now as part of this comp plan. There's some value in looking at the proposals that are in the record already in the VUGA. Some of those may or may not make sense. Some of them may or may not go to as high a density as we might want to see given our new mandates under the law, but at least that identifies those properties that right now are in play. And that can tell us something about the market that I think we should know right now as we do this work.
Thank you, Brian. Anybody else? Jack.
Yeah, I'm going to jump back a little bit to our last iterations that we're talking about was again just jumping to the flexibility. I get to the and it seems simple, but do you want to be able to do detached multifamily? And the reason I'm kind of going back to this, we're looking at a lot of these patchworks, these smaller ones that Eric can tell you very much, he's probably a national expert on what it costs to do subdivision of lots and things like that. We have the opportunity where we're able to do the density, not subdivide the property, build something like maybe what Jen's doing, 14 foot, 16 foot wide on a smaller lot, but be detached. We can condoize them and then sell them to the marketplace to increase the home ownership opportunity. As we're doing, and the reason I kind of keep going back to that, because I'm looking in all of these things that I know when we hit a certain scale, it's 100% corporate owned, right? It's all institutional money that will own our housing. And I want to create as many opportunities for the marketplace to produce housing that's going to be homeownership. And whether that's through, condoizing, but people like a single family product. And, but a lot of those don't make sense in you have these weird areas they're really kind of too small for apartments, but they have the zoning for higher density. but we could put single family there, so that's something I really want to kind of keep in mind, because I keep coming back to like, what are my kids going to be able to buy in the next 15 years? And yeah, so that's one of my thoughts.
All right, Elizabeth, it looks like you're good to keep moving.
Yeah, no, thanks for all these different thoughts. It's just so interesting to be picking up these strategies from a few years ago and thinking about how we're all, continuing to evolve in our thinking and what the opportunities are now. So great. I appreciate the challenge to keep thinking. So here's another one where maybe the specific strategy is a little narrow, and we have an opportunity to think a little more broadly here. So part of the audit findings on the HOSAP strategy was to look at the open space requirements in multifamily, and specifically to look at how that open space is required as you get to higher density products, because the current formula for open space is a certain amount of square footage per unit. So the more units, the higher density that we say, is fulfilling some important goals, the greater the open space, which then in turn crowds out the number of units you're trying to accommodate. So so that was the original strategy, was to address sort of that particular scenario. But some additional opportunities that come up when we take a look at these requirements is improving both the quality and the usability of these spaces, not necessarily just quantity. And that there's also been some questions both from applicants as well as talking to community development staff. They also would like some clarity about this overlap between what counts as meeting the open space requirements, what counts, what the setback requirements are, the overall site landscaping, and that counting them all separately has been sort of has emerged as a safer path of, or sort of well, I don't know about safer, but just a sense like, well, if we meet each one individually, that, we can, as a conservative way of ensuring all those are met, but it can add up to be a pretty significant portion of the site. And there's been some different questions about whether that was ever the intent, or if there is some overlap. So putting all these pieces together and also thinking, right, as we've just been talking so much about this need for more flexibility and more density, I think that, a bigger first step is really to zoom out a little and think about what is the intent of these open spaces in multifamily development. And that could hopefully help us brainstorm and refine some of the specific code requirements. And so some of those opportunities is really thinking about, it's really the amount of space and the quality, the character of the space, right? So first question as we start thinking about this, depending on, the overall focus that that the open space is trying to achieve, is thinking about what's the total amount of open space that should be required. And, one of the fundamental questions there is, does it, are you interested to continue measuring it per unit, or is it move towards a percentage of the site? Did a small amount of comparative research. This could be a big rabbit hole, but the short answer is other jurisdictions do both, as you all are probably familiar working across the county. Some only have, very specific requirements, like one play structure that's this big if you have over X number of units. And the rest of it, is really sort of up to the developer to decide how much green space is provided as long as the setbacks are all met. Some have no specific, open space amenities. It's just about the site landscaping or the setbacks that are required. So, I think sort of one question is like, does the code even need to require these open space amenity areas? Again, it is going to depend on the purpose. Is it about creating some, pervious surface, some green landscaped areas for the eyes to rest on, or is it about creating spaces that can be actively used, more like a park? So again, with those ideas in the background, then the next step becomes defining what areas can count towards that open space requirement. That's where we get into those questions like, is there any overlap between these open spaces and the required yard setbacks? Right, it depends on what the purpose of the space is. Again, like if you have a landscaping buffer that's all full of arborvitae, that's not an active open space, but it is a landscaped, pervious space that's providing some, green space. So depending on your purpose, it may or may not make sense to count that. As you probably have all seen in different codes, some codes specify the minimum size, dimensions, whether it can be private space or common spaces, indoors or outdoors. And again, like some codes really focus in on like you need these particular active uses like a play area or a swimming pool or something. And others are more flexible. So, I think those are all choices that can be made. And so I guess to open it up, and hopefully this isn't too wide, but I think we need to go a little bit wider in order to focus in on answering the question. Like, what do you think the priorities need to be for the county's open space requirements? Should we stay really focused on those higher density sites? Is that really still where the issue is, just as we looked at in the HOSAP? Or, is there opportunity to open it up more broadly? The current requirement is about 200 square feet, roughly, that could be 10 to 13% of a site, depending on how many units you're looking at. Would you like to stay at a similar standard like that, where there's a lot of flexibility about what counts towards it? Or maybe, decrease the quantity while upping the specificity could be some trade-offs. So thoughts from the group.
Jack, please start us off.
Okay, so I know there was at one point an administrative change.
Jack, I don't know about everybody else. I'm having a little bit of a problem hearing you. I think maybe get a little closer to your microphone or something along those lines.
Yeah, let me see if.
Oh, that's better.
How does that? Is that better?
That's better. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I remember there was an administrative challenge, or there was a change in how things were being interpreted at one point, on how all of this was being calculated, and it creates some angst in the development community. I think for me, the important thing is kind of defining what the purpose of the purpose of the setbacks and the spaces are. Because when I look at, we're trying to increase density, but have the pervious surface and have usable, what I would think would be usable space. Then we're also thinking about, well, maybe we don't need to have a setback. Maybe we can build more like an urban center where we're building on the property line, have our eaves overhanging the sidewalks or whatever that looks like. But then that 5 feet or 10 feet, we now have the flexibility to add that into a courtyard space to make it something more usable or more flexible. And then that would create a better living condition versus everybody having a 5-foot strip around their building meets the 200 square foot requirement, and then it's not usable at all. So I think kind of defining what our actual end goal is. I think some of the setbacks when we get to the multifamily stuff, we need to look at, because it actually turns into a lot of square footage on a site. And especially when we're looking versus public right of way versus, if we're joining a residential area, well, that's maybe a little different argument. But yeah, kind of think a little bit differently, more the goal of what it is versus the technicality of what it is.
Thank you, Jack. Eric.
Just a little background on that multifamily open space. For probably 20 plus years, since we've been working in the area, they were met individually and not cumulatively. So if you had some open space that was on your site and it provided recreation, it was counted in both thresholds because they had different purposes. They were never intended to do that. There was a planner at the county that had a different interpretation. They had a meeting, they decided they're changing it because when they read the code in the most literal sense, then it wasn't clear. It wasn't that it was wrong, it just wasn't clear. There could be two different interpretations from the same language. So instead of them taking that route where it historically has been interpreted from the intent, they changed to a different level. And there was a whole code, there was a biannual code, there was an emergency ordinance, there was all that stuff to fix it. It kind of got put on hold due to this process. So at a minimum, we need to make sure they're not cumulative, because if we start adding these together, take open space, take recreation space, take stormwater, take critical areas. By the time we do that, we're not going to be able to fit hardly any units. We're going to have a really tough time trying to get any kind of density. So we're increasing the density, it's not going to work. Now, there's no reason why if you have landscaped area and you make it into something with recreational as well, that it couldn't fulfill both thresholds. And that's how it historically has been, and it has been done in other jurisdictions too. So the county's new interpretation was kind of off of the industry standard, but it was the safe choice. But it really should have been corrected with a management decision instead of going back through the process that it did. It really burned up a lot of time and resources. But we ended up getting to the same spot. Staff and I think development community were on the same page. It was supposed to go to council, but put on hold. So that's the background. And then really, I think whenever we look at anything here, we need to increase increase like densities, things like that. But we have to, I wouldn't make any change that makes anything more restrictive, because there's a reason why that may work in some cases. The market will decide. Most of the time, the market wants the highest density because that's where they're going to get that's where it could pencil out. But there are cases where you have to go lower. There's cases where you have to do something different. You have other constraints that we're not even thinking of. There's so many competing interests that anytime that anything we're proposing makes it more restrictive, I would say no. Let's not even go there. It's anytime you do that, it's going to raise cost or make a project infeasible. So increasing flexibility, yes. Anything that reduces that makes it more difficult or an additional constraint, I would try to avoid.
Yeah, so can I just ask for a little more specificity, shall we say, in terms of avoiding adding more restrictions, right? And not making it more restrictive. Does that in your mind mean the total amount of space, or what about this trade-off of, well, right now it's 200 odd square feet per unit, but maybe that number went down significantly if there were, more specific improvements to that area? Would that be like, how would you feel about that trade-off?
That seems all right, because it's not making it more restrictive. It gives you more options.
Right.
So we're not putting an additional restriction on something. We're giving more flexibility, but we're not taking anything away that's there now. We do have to fix that open space, rec space issue, though. That
Sure,
already is making projects infeasible. And if we do more things like that, we're going to make more and more projects infeasible. And it doesn't matter what incentives we use for the increased density and all those other things. We're not going to be able to hit them either way. And then if we increase the minimums, all of a sudden we're not going to hit it there too. So we're going to have sites that are out of compliance with no economic use of the property. So I really want to avoid that if possible.
Thanks.
Brian, go ahead.
So I don't want to wade into whether open space is necessary or that it outweighs the need for density, right? You guys in the board can decide that. But I did want to point out the 200 square foot per unit versus 10% of the site, right? Which one is better? If you're going to go 10% of the site and you don't want that to be a giant number, you would probably want to exclude certain things like right of way or critical areas. Otherwise, that 10% of the site could be a lot more than the 200% per unit. I'm sorry, 200 square feet per unit. Just an observation.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I've even seen codes that say it's 10% of the usable floor area
Gotcha.
for the apartments, or some sort of net acreage. But yeah, rather than just an overall 10% site of the gross site.
Thanks, Brian. Ron.
Yeah, looking at this, Wolf has done a couple of cottage developments within the city, and they're doing one within the county now. And it is amazing how differently that these pieces of open space are looked at based on individual interpretation. So I do think that's definitely one of the things, as was being alluded to earlier by Eric. If we settle on something, it's got to be something that you can count on being interpreted in the same fashion. We've had a lot of good results in the concept of having all of the vegetated buffers as part of the open space and working with pathways and so forth that just meander through so the space is usable. All it takes is a bench or two to meet most of that criteria. But we did have a discussion about the idea of, based on the location of the particular lot that you're trying to develop, its relationship between trails or parks or school playgrounds. We were wondering if there was an opportunity to kind of play off of that, a bonus in regard to if it's, less than a quarter mile away or something of that nature, where you may not need to outfit that facility yourself and you can get a density bonus by getting that piece of property that is in conjunction with some of these other public facilities that are already in place and made available. Because ultimately, I think what we're looking for is anybody that's in a high density development having the capability of getting out of their dwelling and being able to have some space to move around, some open space for places that are multifamily, which are going to tend to be young family. Then it's the idea of the kids having some active play space, which a lot of schools and parks could actually meet that criteria already, rather than having to be duplicated on the site. So I think we really, once again, should be looking at what can we do for the criteria based on the particular location and size of the parcel. And Wolf was very successful using the 200 square foot per unit. And I think they would advocate to continue with that if that just becomes the only question that's answered.
Thanks.
Brian.
I agree with that, and I think what other folks have said as well. It maybe is there to make some of those we had talked earlier about for some small parcels, it's just harder to site a multifamily building. Should we be more flexible on the smaller parcels that don't have, and the smaller projects that aren't going to have as many units? And the need for, I guess, sort of physical space, visual space is probably a little bit, arguably, I think a little bit less. I do think I think as everyone said, there's sort of historically been this blurring of many objectives that we kind of need to unpack a little bit. Some of these space requirements, I think, are kind of vestiges of prior ideas that apartments are just bad, and that we need to have and we need to separate them from other uses. So I think, for instance, if there are opportunities where for those perhaps multifamily developments that don't abut existing residential or abut less of it, there might be an argument for more flexibility there, because are able to address sort of setback issues through tree plantings or through avoidance of glare, that kind of thing. Maybe some more flexibility for that too. So these are kind of generalities. I wish I had some specifics to throw out there, but I think we do want to provide more flexibility and particularly for those smaller projects, particularly for those projects that abut less existing residential.
Yeah, Brian, the rear setbacks in the high density zones for apartments are like 20 feet right now, which is, pretty high.
Yeah.
All right, Elizabeth, I think time to keep moving.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
And Elizabeth, can we do a check-in? We're about halfway through our time. I just want to make sure we're moving through the topics at a rate you're happy with.
I am very pleased. Thank you
Okay.
all. It's been great feedback, but we've also kept moving. So I would say we're pretty much right on track.
Okay.
Yeah, I was afraid we'd anyways, there's so much to discuss, but we're making good progress. All right, so next concept is talking about affordable housing in some commercial areas. So this has come up a couple times in conversations, right? And so currently the commercial zones, you can only do upper story, but there was an idea, the HOSAP strategy specifically is to allow defined affordable housing projects, so projects that meet some regulatory requirements and income restrictions, to permit those outright in the general commercial and the community commercial zone, with no ground floor commercial, so it could just be all residential. The idea being like, that's not very many projects in total, so it's not that many sites that are converted to residential use. There's not a lot of competition with market rate residential in those zones, since the market rate residential would have to do the ground floor commercial. And that just those sites that, you know, the market prices at lower entry point, at lower price points that affordable housing providers can acquire, you know, sort of that lower price inherently reflects that they have a lower commercial development potential. So some real opportunities here. City of Vancouver does something similar already, which is sort of where our strategy came from with the HOSAP. We've also, you know, just as background, as you all have probably been more intimately aware, right, that going to county council for changing the comp plan and the zoning from commercial to residential to permit a larger affordable housing project can be pretty daunting. The council generally prefers to maintain commercial capacity, but this particular focus on just affordable housing, you know, could be sort of a narrow path that with multiple supporters. So moving forward with that strategy, would you prefer to see all affordable housing projects permitted, you know, anywhere in these zones? Or would it make sense to really focus on sites that are served by transit and meet some of the same definitions that we'll look at for frequent transit that's going to be applied to some affordable, to some reduced parking standards for affordable housing? So that the idea being, you know, this is where the parking is less, so it's more feasible to do the project. So that would be, you know, sort of a combo deal, shall we say. And then the other is like, does it make sense? Or we also heard that one of the appealing parts about developing in the commercial zones is actually that there aren't a lot of dimensional standards there, that there's no maximum height or density, and that can actually make it easier to do an affordable housing project that might not fit actually in even the highest density R43 zone. So does that make sense to keep it like that, maintain that flexibility? Or is there anything that would be useful to apply to these residential projects to, you know, just address scale and make it fit in better in commercial areas, maybe make it more palatable for neighboring property owners and or the council politically? So yeah, ideas on that.
Jack's ready again. Go ahead, Jack.
Okay, so I was on the planning commission with the city when this came through before us, so I spent a lot of time on that. Regulated, the first proposal was anything 80% AMI on any commercial. So, and I know Brian could, you know, tell us exactly where we landed, but it was 50% AMI and then passed hit some pretty restrictive goals. The concern that I had then, and I do now, is when we take our commercial land, which is our tax-based land, because individual residences, we don't pay enough taxes for the services we provide, and that it is even a higher load as the lower income goes. That we could really damage some of the other things that we're doing to our tax base and wanting to have active commercial areas. The ones that I've seen that were built in the city, we no longer have that commercial requirement on the base floor, and it's not congruent with the 10-minute neighborhoods or the 15-minute neighborhoods in the active community, you know, standards. So that's always my concern, is like we want these little, you know, high density active, you know, community retail commercial space, but then they get those land pieces get gobbled up by the nonprofit providers because they're cheaper to go for more in the marketplace. The open market. So, potential problems there pleased with the products that I've seen. It's gotten really engaged space that we were going for on those before. It's just important that goes, straight to the ground. So one of the things that consider all the show.
Jack, I think we got the gist of what you were saying. You were kind of in and out a little bit again.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thanks.
Is there, like, is it possible, like, your microphone is getting covered up by your thumbs or something? That happens to me sometimes, that's all. Speaking from experience.
Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think in the context of placement, this is on the items that's on the screen right at the moment. I think because Clark County's transit is so lacking, that it would be something that would just really limit the affordable housing opportunities if we say that they have to have sites served by transit. I am a proponent of them going into the commercial land. I had a very difficult time understanding what Jack was getting at it, but the gist of it, I think, is he thinks that affordable housing has some sort of unfair competitive advantage on buying up the land. I know that Victor Caesar with Vancouver Housing Authority is at least listening to this right now. But I would say that nonprofits are not cash cows, and they don't have the ability to do anything except for buy up parcels that are perhaps not so desirable within the commercial market. And I don't see the conflict with the projects that Vancouver Housing Authority has done and that I've been part of so far. I think that they've been very compatible. If we felt like we wanted to keep the first floor commercial, I think we would have to understand that probably most of it would end up being office space for service providers and nonprofits themselves. The compatibility isn't that great when you're talking about the building specific, but if a parcel has the opportunity to have a mix of commercial buildings and residential buildings, I think that gives us even more flexibility with it. If I don't really remember the previous slide exactly what the questions were.
Do you think that we need any more any dimensional standards on this? There's not yeah, it's really just
Well-
outlining the strategy that, permitting these outright in the commercial zones. And that has been, sort of a narrow avenue of viability specific for affordable housing. And that's really what the strategy comes from. So I would say in this case, we have a pretty clear strategy to implement, and it's just a question of, are there any additional components to it, such as specifying parts of these commercial zones or adding, any other dimensional standards. But the direction from HOSAP was to move forward with implementing affordable housing in these zones.
And I would concur with that, I guess, just to put it that simply.
Mm-hmm.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Ron, and as best we know, as best I know, there have been only a handful of developments in Vancouver that have utilized the provisions of affordable housing projects on near transit without that take advantage of the no first floor requirement. And the nonprofit sector just isn't that big, and I think the hit to commercial land and the jobs that is provided is also just not that big in the big scheme of things. I think also there's no question it does give a competitive advantage to affordable housing projects and providers, and I think we need more of those kind of competitive advantages and ways to grease the skids for those providers, particularly given the daunting number of well below market, 30% and less or 50% of AMI and less projects that the private market doesn't build, and we need the affordable housing sector to do that. And so that we're gonna have to do under law, provide for under law. So I would even favor something that's a little more flexible than what we've done in the city. Although I would like to see, and I think in most cases, affordable housing providers want to locate near transit. I think it's a necessary trade-off to let them go further from transit if that's the only place they can find. If that results in more affordable housing, then I think we should do it.
Thanks.
Not seeing any other hands right now.
Okay, so that brings us to some other questions about the commercial and the mixed use zones, right? If you recall the HOSAP discussion, we started sort of broadly talking about residential and commercial zones and spun it off into these two different avenues. One specific to move forward with affordable housing in those zones. And then the other strategy was about looking for more feasibility for market rate residential in these commercial and mixed use zones. And so some of the pieces that have come up both in that strategy and in our discussion around the strategy last year was, are there ways to add some more residential units or residential uses, beyond that regulated affordable housing, maybe defining workforce housing and targeting, the 80 to 120 AMI or somewhere in that range, looking at opportunities to change the ground floor commercial use, allowing some different ways to meet that standard if that's active ground floor use areas. And then also looking at horizontal mixed use configurations in the commercial zones currently permitted in mixed use, but not in commercial. So those were some ideas for market rate residential. The initial feedback we got when we had this conversation last year, when we started talking about this, was that this idea of horizontal mixed use in the commercial zones was one of the most promising strategies. We heard a lot of enthusiasm. Not that we only have to pick one, but just that that really seemed like the more viable one that merited putting some more effort into, and the others just weren't very interesting or likely to add more residential flexibility. So curious to hear if that still sounds right to you, if that's where to focus here, if there's anything else to add to the list. If we are thinking about, a horizontal mixed use option in commercial zones, time to just, since we're here, if you have any ideas about specific percentages, right now the mixed use zones allow horizontal and they have a at least 20% non-residential requirement, except a few scenarios you can reduce that. But is 20%, a good number in these commercial zones? Is there a different number that would make sense, that would make this both a feasible but also politically viable strategy, since we're hearing about, and we heard during the HOSAP the importance of maintaining that tax base and maintaining the commercial function of the commercial zones. And then moving out of the commercial, right? We heard that, on the one hand, the horizontal mixed use allowance in the MX zones is helpful, but that there really hasn't been very much development there. And that might partially just be due to its location up on, 179th is where a lot of it's located. So it's just farther away from some things, still needs a lot of infrastructure improvements that can be pretty spendy. But on paper, I think it's worth coming back to the MX district, because again, when we go to that capacity that we're trying to provide with the 2025 plan, there's actually more capacity in the MX zones on paper than those high density residential zones, that are supposed to be the bread and butter apartments. So right now it is a pretty significant source of capacity for the county. So is it worth taking another look? Are there things like reducing the commercial use component, maybe in that zone permitting affordable housing outright, adjusting some design standards, something there that would help? Or is it more just about the location and timing and needing some infrastructure to catch up? So, great. So that is those are the discussion questions. Turn it over to you all.
Bill, go ahead.
Elizabeth, thanks for teeing this up. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I think it's an extremely important issue. There is a ton of comp plan MX zoned property in Clark County. I think some of the business park zoning suffers from the same issue. There's a lot of potential in that property, and in my view, the mixed use zoning code, Clark County's mixed use zoning code, particularly the horizontal mixed use zoning code, it doesn't work. In our experience, we've tried to figure out how to make it work for a developer that's primarily trying to deliver attainably priced housing, whether it's rental or for sale. And we just can't make it work. I think the only folks that have been really successful with MX are, I don't know if anybody's been super successful with it, but gosh, the location has to be just right. I mean, maybe on Fourth Plain Boulevard that's already in a commercial district where the commercial component of the project really pencils. Other than that, I think, folks are just trying to find ways around the mixed use code. How do we justify a commercial component? Maybe we put some supportive housing in there for older population, anything that would qualify as commercial. So I'll just sum up by saying that I think there's tremendous potential for Clark County in this topic. I think it's complicated in the long term. I don't know if we can address it in this, but I think it's extremely important. The mixed use zoning code, in my opinion, doesn't work, and it's got to be addressed, and the sooner the better.
Thanks, Phil. I'm glad to hear the relative importance of this. That's good context.
Anyone else have thoughts or feelings on this one? Ron?
Yeah, I think this group should at least acknowledge the fact of how much capacity the county is already penciling in based on the MX zoning. We can't really afford to give it away when we're already in such a deficit. We can't look at it from the standpoint that we would in the past just say, well, eventually this will be the only land that's available and then it'll get developed, because that's the hierarchy of things. The hardest parts get done last. I don't think that's what we want to go in trying to accomplish. So perhaps, and I'm building off of what Phil was saying, it isn't appropriate for this group to try and take it on in this setting or venue, but we definitely should say that it's super important to get a group of people together to look at the idea of how to utilize that housing capacity and still make it commercially viable. My memory on most of it is it's far too much design standard oriented, where it limits choices and what you can do. It limits the kind of product that goes in. And I think other than doing assisted living, as Phil alluded to, it's hard to even pencil it out correctly for high density apartments because of all of the commercial requirements that go in along next door to it. So I agree. I think it's super important. I think we've already baked that capacity into the county's assumptions, and it needs a lot of work.
Thanks, Ron.
Right, not seeing any other hands at this time.
Yeah, well, just it's funny. I kind of threw this MX question in as just an aside. So maybe just to solicit one more time, any particular thoughts on the commercial zones? I don't know. Maybe if the MX is struggling so much, allowing similar horizontal mixed use and commercial, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Like maybe that isn't as viable as we thought, but just specifically in commercial zones, anything that you see we could do within the strategy now?
Elizabeth, I'm sorry. I just raised my hand and started talking at the same time. I hope that's okay. What are you asking about commercial zones? I'm not clear on the question.
Sure.
'Cause,
Okay.
I mean, right now, residential is allowed on anything above the first floor. I think whether that's horizontal or vertical mixed use. So, I mean, in the commercial zones, you can do plenty of residential already. You still have to meet the commercial requirements. So, I mean, unless you're talking about a wholesale rezoning to allow, 100% residential use, whether that's a mix, whether that's all market rate or a mix of market rate and affordable. I'm not clear on the question.
Thanks, Phil. Yes, the strategy was talking about market rate residential and prompted us to see, are there code changes that we could make to those commercial standards that are not a full scale rezone? So it's not allowing 100% affordable or market rate residential, but it would allow more residential uses through some additional flexibility, like moving, right now it's only vertical mixed use in the commercial zones. So could we introduce horizontal mixed use in those commercial zones to add some more flexibility? Would that be helpful in adding meaningful residential capacity for commercial zones or other changes to the commercial use standards?
Yeah, so a couple of comments on that specifically, and I'll stop talking. One is that going from vertical to horizontal mixed use is complicated in commercial zones because once you go from vertical to horizontal, all of a sudden you're moving to a 20% gross floor area standard. I believe that's the case. I may be confusing Vancouver's code, but I think it's very similar in Clark County. And meeting that 20% gross floor area commercial horizontal mixed use is almost impossible. You can't make it pencil. It's just too much of the building space is allocated to commercial uses. And if it's horizontal mixed use, not much of it can be up on the street. So to me, if you're going to try to encourage more residential or horizontal mixed use, the commercial requirements, in my view, should be, really limited to that street frontage and maybe just a percentage of the street frontage. You may not be getting all of the commercial that you want, but that would be one way to say, hey, then as a residential developer, we could look at a piece of property and say, okay, yeah, I can underwrite, 8% of my space at 0 and the project still works, and then maybe I can lease it out to a few commercial uses. Hopefully it works. You never know. But if I've got 20% of the gross floor area, there's no way I'll ever get to a project. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
All right, what's next, Elizabeth?
I know, the fun continues, Steve. All right, next one. I know you all came for this one. Let's talk about the Highway 99 plan and some limited opportunities identified in the HOSAP to revise. So I know that it's a complicated plan and that there's mixed feelings about it. But the specific HOSAP strategies looked at opportunities to exempt some multifamily residential development that meets affordability criteria, that to exempt them from some of the design standards and guidelines. And I think that the goal was make it easier to do affordable housing outright throughout the Highway 99 plan sub area. We're looking for some specificity on which those design standards were, because we haven't gotten a lot of feedback on that. And unfortunately, that wasn't in the strategy itself. So agree with the direction, but just trying to dial in on what that is. And then the other key part of the Highway 99 revisions that are scoped in the HOSAP is changing how middle housing is addressed. And so now that middle housing is permitted throughout all the R1 zones, essentially helping the Highway 99 plan catch up with what's permitted in the underlying zones by changing any design standards that apply to these housing types: duplexes, townhouses, ADUs, triplexes, and quadplexes, taking those out and just defaulting to the standards that apply countywide, and then making sure that these same middle housing types are permitted in the residential overlays within the sub area that right now, and this primarily means the single family overlay is the majority of is mostly zoned R1, and just clarifying in the plan that everything that's permitted in R1, all these middle housing types, is also permitted in the single family overlay in the sub area, so that Highway 99 isn't exempt or or outside of these great new middle housing opportunities. So within the bounds of, middle housing and the single family overlay and affordable housing design standards, looking for your feedback about both those pieces. Any clues about what specific Highway 99 strategy or standards have been or could be a problem for affordable housing? I mean, is it about balconies? Is it about, what is it about that we could help, target in these code updates? And just as we're looking at permitting middle housing similar to R1, is there anything in the Highway 99 plan? Is there any way that middle housing should be treated differently in the Highway 99 sub area that should be incorporated into the revised plan? Or should it just fully align with the R1 standards that were just adopted?
Jack, go ahead, please.
Okay, how's the sound?
So far, so good.
Looking directly into the mic and what's going on with it. I am trying to understand the. I guess Elizabeth, this is more for you. Like, what is the? Are we reducing like the design standards? There would be one way for the market rate, and then the affordable housing could build a different standard than what we were hoping for.
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I'll just stand up and say that. We got through the strategy development. We heard, it's particularly difficult for affordable housing to develop according to the Highway 99 design standards. And so, trying to support affordable housing, the HOSAP said, great, let's address that problem. But I don't know what the standards are. And so I don't know, what those adjustments look like. And, to your point, I think the strategy was intending to change certain things just for affordable housing. So there would be a difference for how affordable housing and how market rate would be treated. But as we're still trying to figure out exactly what those design standards are, it's hard to say what it would look like or if it makes sense to change
Yeah, I mean, for me to have, any real input, I would like to know some more specificity of what that looked like, what the implications are. Because generally speaking, I mean, affordable housing costs 2 to 3 times. For them to build a unit is 2 to 3 times what the private sector is building those units for. It's generally not the design standards that are getting them, because that's just such a tiny little portion. It's everything else. So I really would like to have a little more specificity there.
Me too, right? So this is the opportunity if anyone in the room can give us some specificity, or if we say, you know what, we didn't get a lot of specifics, and so there's nothing that we need to do to move forward on this strategy. I think that's sort of where we're at.
Let's go to Brian Mattson, and then we'll go to Eric, and then Phil. Brian, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I don't know all the specificities, but I know that Dan Wisner does, because he's talked to me a number of times about townhomes in the Highway 99 area. So if you send him an email, I'm sure he's already got it. He could copy and paste it for you.
He's in the
But
room.
he's already
He's in the
sent to
room.
me.
Yeah.
For example, just one thing I'm looking at as I'm looking at the Highway 99 while you're talking. Townhomes are only permitted in the multifamily and activity center overlays, right? So you had mentioned deferring to the underlying zone for middle housing.
Yeah.
That would fix that if you wanted townhomes in more areas. Chapter 7 of the Highway 99 standards talks about the different housing types. It has the townhomes. 7.5 is townhomes. I haven't had to look, and I've done a couple projects, but it's been a long time, and I don't remember. There's been a lot of projects since then. Duplexes also has its own standards, and single family does, but there's really nothing in the single family ones of any consequence. But I don't know if that adds to specificity, but it adds something.
Yeah, thanks, Brian.
Go ahead, Eric.
Just to build on what Brian just said, there used to be a lot more residential standards in the Highway 99, and we got rid of them probably 8 to 10 years ago, maybe less than that, but through some other code updates through Deeb. So there used to be a bunch of design standards. we got rid of them. But either way, I think aligning them with our standards is the best option, because right now the Highway 99 standards, what we really want are more incentives and flexibility. The Highway 99 standards basically add additional requirements, restrictions, and additional process hoops, which don't help with affordability at all. So the Highway 99 standards kind of went just, I think, a little bit sideways. The original goal was a planning tool, so we have less piecemeal development. So it develops in a certain pattern and it's consistent along the frontage, because it's kind of older development, trying to get like pedestrian circulation, things like that in that area. The problem is what we're getting instead is we're getting sites that don't develop because it's too complicated to develop to the new standards, and they sit there in their existing condition, which may be run down. So we really want to have standards that help incentivize and provide more flexibility so they will develop, instead of deterrence from development, which is what they're doing right now.
Phil.
Yeah, quickly, I'm just piling on here. The Highway 99 plan, while well-intended, is 124 pages of overlapping requirements that's extremely confusing. And I think what's more troubling from a development perspective is that it's subject to endless interpretation. And what does that mean? It means that when developers are looking at a piece of property, there's zero certainty as to what can and can't be achieved. And if there's no certainty, there's no investment. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Daniel.
Yeah, what Brian alluded to is that I've talked to him about, I've beat my head on the Highway 99 overlay for 3 different projects trying to do townhouses specifically. And it's the design elements, it's the confusion that Phil talked about. So those just make it way too difficult to develop within the Highway 99 for residential, especially for the middle housing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
All right.
It sounds like we can have some success changing the middle housing standards to use the new R1 standards instead.
Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely on board with moving to the R1 standards. The question, I think, the other one, specific standards, could be concern for affordable housing development. Going back to the way that Eric phrased it, I think is the right way. Why don't we just try and get more generous with allowances for people that are going to put some affordable housing in place? I started off this conversation earlier in the hour about talking about, let's get rid of the height standards. Let's look at the aspect that if the people want to put in enough parking for everybody, they get an extra floor or something like that. If they go underground parking, you give them 2 floors, something that allows them to really see that there's a benefit on building the housing that we're looking at right there. This is in essence the workforce housing location and opportunity that I think we should be really focusing in on. Jack talked about, some home ownership aspect of it. I think there is probably work that needs to be done by the county to be looking at more along the line of what is the starting price for people coming into a home ownership. But the availability of enough housing units is going to be what's going to even have the ability to start that discussion about people being able to afford to buy in. Is the competition can't be so great that they're always going to be behind on it. So I think Highway 99 is a great opportunity to really get a lot of housing units in place. Perhaps a lot of them are apartments or townhouse attached type dwellings, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to put more in there and give us some relief at the same time.
Brian, you have some more?
Yeah, just one parting suggestion. So, when I mentioned early, chapter 7 has all these housing design features. There's the rest of the Highway 99 you'll need to address also if you're going to defer to the R1s, because you have frontage types and all these other different standards in the other chapters. So just deferring chapter 7 wouldn't do what I think you guys want to do. Just putting that out there. Make sure you address it more broadly.
Yeah, we were talking in advance of like, wow, it's so overlapping and interrelated, and you can debate whether that's a feature or a bug.
You have to, the Highway 90, I get stuck with a lot of these projects, and it's like a choose your own adventure book. You just start at the beginning and you turn to page X and then to page Y and then to page Z, and it's daunting to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, editorial comment, right? It's a historical document from 2008 when there were some very specific ideals in planning that I don't think are the prevalent thinking today. So it's just interesting how it's changed. All right, we have just a couple more to wrap up. Not a lot of questions, but just a quick overview here, lightning round. There's some multifamily parking reductions that are required by changes to state law. So just these are all based on transit. That's the way Washington seems to, that's what the legislature is obsessed with right now, is defining all these different things that you get to do based on your proximity to transit. So the one that really applies to the county right now is regulated affordable multifamily served by transit operating 2 times per hour. So we'll introduce some new parking standards for all 3 of these, but just know that's the one that could have immediate implementation. The others, the transit operating 4 times per hour, that's really the BRT, the Vine that CTRAN has put in. And so what we're hearing is that the next line, the next rapid transit line is likely coming to the Highway 99 corridor that will qualify. And so, again, we'll put all these ratios into the code. There is a link on the CTRAN website right now. You can vote for which color you want the new transit line. I think they're debating between purple and orange. So, if you have feelings about that, you should go online and vote. Next is the hotels to housing conversions, emerging practice to create more affordable housing by allowing the conversion of existing lodging uses that are generally located in commercial areas. Generally, these are going to be done to commercial standards, but just looking at, whether any of these other requirements about, uses, density, open space parking, if any of those are going to come into play. There's not a ton of existing hotels, motels within the Vancouver UGA that could, I have no thoughts about how commercially viable they are, but there's not even that many of them to potentially be converted. But this was a strategy that came up during HOSAP. It's certainly something we can address during code. But I guess just since you're all together, is this a type of project that's still of interest? I heard a lot about it during the pandemic and I've heard very little since then. So are housing providers still doing this? If so, are there any particular standards that you might know of that we need to address?
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's as much need right now, but it doesn't make sense to take away options and tools in the toolbox if we need them later. So I would say if it's something that we're allowing, I think we continue to allow it. It might help us hit some of those bottom ones, or at least some of the things for temporary shelters in the right location. I know they're not popular though when they do happen. So I think our goals are 1, increasing like affordable housing, and then 2, trying to minimize the impact to existing development and the community around it. So in this case, it's one of those few things where there's significant, potential adverse impacts that we need to not only make sure we don't take the tool away, but we make sure that it blends with the surrounding area and it doesn't become a problem in the community.
All right, thanks.
Anyone else? Jack?
Yeah, so to clarify, this kind of like what I think was happened on 78th and I-5 there, the old hotel that was converted. Looks like to some kind of permanent dry housing or something like that. Is that what we're looking at?
It sounds like it. I don't know that particular project, but
Okay. Yeah, it was Casper or Sandblasting or something had done something there. I mean, I like it in concept, especially if it's like drug and alcohol free kind of thing.
Mhm.
I'm with Eric in that, and this is one of the concerns I have when we have kind of two competing goals. When you have high concentrations of low income housing in one area, it can really be a drag on the area. And and I always kind of say large concentrations of poor decision makers can make for a bad environment versus dispersal. And because then it doesn't overwhelm the schools, it doesn't overwhelm that specific spot of the community. So I think it's wise when we're looking, especially at affordable housing, that we're pushing it towards kind of one area versus maybe spreading that out throughout the county and the community. And I think that might be something to consider in some of these conversations of like, how can we disperse that versus concentrate it?
Okay.
All right, and last one. This has to do the HOSAP strategy specifically. Talks about streamlining permit review for affordable housing by, specifically allowing concurrent review of preliminary land use and final engineering, and allowing submittal of building permit application at any time after preliminary approval. So I recall this conversation about a year ago when we had it, and the first response was, how about we do this for all development? If these are good ideas. So I think, we hear that feedback. I think we also talked a bit about changing some permit review timelines when we were talking about site plan review for triplexes and quadplexes. And so, there's some similar dynamics at play here. Brian Mattson, I'll put you on the spot a little to follow up here, but my summary of our email exchange, is just that community development, is really reported this is really more of a procedural than a code change. So, this is a strategy that could move forward through some actions at community development, isn't necessarily something we need to address with code, and that there is a small sort of ad hoc pilot currently underway for some industrial sites that are a little less complicated. And so, Brian, anything you want to add to clarify my summary?
No. I just, it's a great theory, right? It never has worked out for me ever. It just hasn't. I don't know why. It just never, it sounds great, right? It sounds reasonable, and it never goes smoothly. And that's
So-
just anecdotal. That's not evidence, right? But
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that's where we're at. Since there isn't code, I wasn't going to spend a lot of time discussing this, but we'll just sort of segue into, our last 8 minutes here for open discussion. If you do have thoughts about that particular strategy, other ideas or questions that we haven't addressed, yeah, like your chance to have a last word here. And then I guess I'll just have my last word real quick, just to say that we'll be taking these concepts and working on some initial code and, refined concepts that inform that code. And you can see we've had this code forum series we had last year's, we have this forum, and then we're looking to have 2 more forum meetings this summer, one in June and one in July, going into public review, have another open house, some other opportunities in fall, and then move forward with that legislative adoption process. So that's my last word. Over to you all.
Any last questions or comments, or are people keen to take 5 minutes back? Eric.
Try to be quick. One thing I think we need to be really conscious is making sure we're really clear on the code language we put in. I know on the last set, this just came up. I don't know how in any, universe, and I don't want to like get too dramatic on it, but we never talked about limiting townhouses, the number of total townhouses in a development. That was never even on the radar. All the examples we looked at, everything the intent of that was to limit the size and scale and have no more than 4 attached units per cluster. So that we wrote code that could be interpreted 2 different ways. You know what? I read it the same way every time. It's like one of those things that if you misspell a word, you're probably going to misspell it every time. When you look at it through a different lens, sure, I can see how you could interpret it differently. But when you go back and you look at the intent and everything we talked about, all the guidance we were given, the state code, the model code, the intent of it, it goes against all of that. So what do we have to do as, I guess, a group to make sure we're clear, or maybe we have where if something comes up, they can come back to us so they can get it. I mean, we could review our minutes. I think they're recorded. I saw that at the beginning. Normally in like a legal sense, when there is, it's like a staff report. You have a condition of approval and then you have a finding. And if the condition of approval is usually just a summary of it, kind of like the code is, and if you have a misinterpretation, you go to the finding and you go back to the work that was put into it and why it was, so you can make a determination. So we need to be really careful. And I'm not sure what we can do on this, the other piece, because it is pretty significant. It's exactly the opposite of what our intent was and what we're trying to achieve here.
Jose or Brian, who wants to go first?
Oh, I'll let Jose go. I was going to speak kind of for Jose, but
I see
I'll
you
let you go
unmuted,
right
so
to
I
the
assume-
right to the source. Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that we don't disagree. We share your frustration and we're working on trying to resolve that.
Great.
And so stay tuned.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Yep.
If there's something we can do to help as a group, let us know, because I mean, we were all here. We put a lot of time in it. So it's pretty frustrating to sit here for hours and hours working on something, think you have something that really works, to find out that everything you worked on is kind of thrown out the door, and we're not meeting the intent of why we're really here in the first place. So I appreciate you guys taking another look at it. Thank you.
And I apologize. I thought that I wrote it clearly too. And yeah, I guess once you start misspelling things, you just always see them the same way. I thought, yeah.
I think everyone's on the same page. I think that's the bottom line. So working towards getting that resolved. Anything else for today's meeting? All right. Well, thanks as always for everyone's participation. A lot of great feedback today and a lot of good comments, which can help guide the next steps. As Elizabeth said, we will be convening again sometime in June. I think Susan will be in touch to help schedule that meeting. So until then, enjoy the beginning of summer and the rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Yeah,
everyone.
thanks, everybody.
See ya.